Hello, Manamine here. Welcome back to my deconstruction of Bernardo Kastrup's article, The Universe is Consciousness. And before I head into part 2 or chapter 2, the mainstream physicalist ontology and its problems, I want to point out something I overlooked from the abstract, which was a part of what I did in the last part. And it's the use of the word propose. Now, if you're using any other kind of, you're sitting in the bar, or you're discussing with somebody on the bus, or you're explaining somebody in the airport terminal how to get this, that, and the other, whatever, some everyday use of the term propose, I'm sort of, okay, I might want to point out, propose is philosophically, it's a particular kind of statement that you propose, otherwise it's not a proposition. When you use it you could maybe even in the average philosophical YouTube video, though I don't like this diminishing the value of something just because it's on YouTube. But in the average discussion of I would propose this, I would propose that. Okay, I might be able to do it, although I would avoid it, right? But in a rigid, supposedly, article that explains a very core metaphysical problem or position, you would not use the term proposition or propose anything, because a proposition is a reference to knowledge. I propose that's an elephant. I propose that's an apple, right? This violation of the use of terms, I'm sick and tired of it, to be honest, right? A proposition is a statement that can only be true or false. And I would say, if either you produce the proposition or you hear the proposition, you alone can justify whether or not it's true or false. You don't need further explanation. Otherwise, it's not a proposition, it's something different. If I stand next to you and you hear me say, that's an elephant, you just need to turn and look in that particular direction and qualify whether or not it's true or false. You don't need my elaborations on this, that, and the other in order to justify, okay, I might be able to say it's true or something like that. Then you're not dealing with a proposition. So my point is, you cannot propose a metaphysics. A metaphysics is not something that can be proposed, because it cannot be true or false. Right? It's not something you can experience. Only things you can experience are something that is directly derived from experience, like an apple, or a bicycle, or an elephant, can be true or false. Otherwise, you're not dealing with a proposition. So this use of propose is a very, very, very poor choice of words, I would say. And to me, it sounds like he doesn't really know what he's doing. But propose and proposition sounds kind of technical, right? It sounds like it's more serious, like, I have an idea of what we might, do this, that, and the other. It sounds more fluffy and more, layperson-like, you could say. But I propose an idealist ontology. Oh my God, this sounds seriously, right? But it doesn't make it more or less correct, the word you choose. And you choose something that is a reference to knowledge, and it cannot possibly, however you turn around your metaphysics, it can never be a claim of knowledge, right? And that's the only thing you can propose. You can propose that that's an elephant, and you propose it in order to get to some agreement about that elephant, right? By proposing it. And I have to be able to justify whether or not it's true or false. Or maybe in a rare occasion, it's an I don't know, right? And it's not, I propose this. Okay, so propose it. I should be able to justify whether or not it's true or false, with no further clarification. I proposed an idealist ontology that makes sense. Okay, true or false? I can't do that, so it cannot be a proposition, right? Otherwise, he's just screwing around with the terms, either because he wants to screw around with them and he is with them, and he's fully aware that he's screwing around with them, or he's ignorant of the meaning they should, or the context he should be used in, and what they could possibly refer to, right? So apparently it's just about choosing some words that sounds like he's smart, and then that's just going to fix things, right? So I don't like that. I don't like that. Okay, so let me see if I can scroll this thing here. Okay, so I did some research of the text here before I headed into this deconstruction. And that is because that my notion is, or my thinking is, it's always in the beginning that the big leaps are taken, or appeals to things that are given to you, you don't have to explain, and so on, right? It's always in the beginning that things, you find the problems. So I the first bit I have pre-deconstructed in order to make sure I get as deep into it as I possibly can, right? Okay, so the chapter 2 is called The Mainstream Physicalist Ontology and Its Problems. Okay, he says, the mainstream ontology of physicalism posits that reality is constituted by irreducible entities, which, like Galen Strawson, I shall call ultimates. Ultimates. Why not just call them entities? Ultimates. Why this? Oh, I shall call them this. Okay, fair enough, you call them. So it's like, yes, you have to describe that which you're giving a name, so you have to describe it by another name in order to give it a name, and so on. It's sort of an inherent problem in starting out in philosophy. So I'll let that pass, right? Okay, but then he says, I shall call ultimates outside and independent of phenomenal consciousness. So what he says is, mainstream ontology of physicalism posits that reality is constituted by ultimates outside and independent of phenomenal consciousness. Now, he says the mainstream ontology of physicalism points that reality is constituted by. Remember, what I'm particularly looking for in this article is, how does he get to an outside? And how does he, if there's an outside and it's the same, which I believe that he still believes and is a part of this article, that both the outside and inside is sort of made of the same stuff, to cut it short, right? And why that is divided then, if it's the same thing, right? He says that physicalism posits that reality, as if there's something reality that everybody knows what is. Reality is that's it's just there. And then he's going to argue about this reality and its understanding. Well, then you need to point to what you mean by reality. You can't point to something as if it's given. That doesn't work. Or at least you have to do that kind of reductive endeavor to get down to the fundamental starting points of what you're referring to. How do you get to that reality? Because it also, by calling something reality, there's only one word that alludes to that there's only one thing, right? So it's like, what is it? What is that reality? What is it? How do you get to it, right? I mean, the only thing you can point to are colors and sounds and taste and so on, right? So then reality must be some kind of extraction or abstraction from colors and sounds, right? So he's talking about the reality that physicalists refer to, but if he has a different kind of philosophy, how does the idea of reality match his? You cannot just say, posit that reality is constituted by this, that, and the other. In this kind of framing it, there must be complete agreement between physicalists and his idealists about what entails in reality. Otherwise, he would have to scrutinize what he means by reality. But by saying implicitly, I'm completely on board with the idea of reality, then he doesn't explain what it is. And if reality is that outside world, then he just says it's there, right? He just says there's an outside world. and the physicalist calls it reality. And it's made up of irreducible entities, whatever. I don't give a shit what it's made of if you cannot argue for why you think it's there. And further down the line, I would say, if you cannot argue for something beyond your experiences, a reality that is outside and independent of phenomenal consciousness, then you have created an inside-out dichotomy, and by aligning yourself with the same understanding of what is entailed by reality, you have placed reality outside your phenomenal consciousness, and you have thereby implied a dichotomy of an inside and an outside that you are not establishing, but just bringing along in this sort of sophist manner, right? So you are appealing to an outside without clarifying how you get to it. I don't like that. Okay, these ultimates in and of themselves do not instantiate phenomenal properties. There is nothing it is like to be an ultimate. Do they say that? I'm not sure, right? The capacity for experience emerging only at the level of complex arrangement of ultimates. Experience, is that phenomenal consciousness? Because now he calls it experience. Then he should say the capacity for phenomenal consciousness rather than saying experience, right? So there's this switch of terms. Stay with one term. If you have clarified something with a term, keep using the same term for it. Otherwise, you're screwing around with my understanding, and you're trying, maybe not trying, consciously, or you're aware of you doing it, but you are throwing me off by using various different terms. If it's the same thing, why are there different terms? And if they're different understanding, why are you not clarifying the understanding, right? Only at the level of complex arrangement of ultimates. They are, now he's sort of trying to steelman, I think the term is, the standpoint of those supposed physicalists. I'm not a physicalist, so I might have an idea of that would some more or less align with what he's describing here, but as not being a physicalist, I won't stand for whether or not this is a correct framing of the understanding of this particular metaphysic, right? They are also sometimes held to lack objective qualities. Okay, so yeah, but I have to step back a bit. He says experience emerging only from the level of complex. Yeah, it's like, yeah, if it gets sufficiently complex, all of a sudden experience arrive out of it for some weird reason that, my nose turns into the smell of roses or something, whatever, right? Maybe that's a bad way of putting it, but it's something along those lines, right? My nose doesn't have smells, but the composition, the complexity of my nose, all of a sudden results in the smell of roses for some weird, inexplicable way, right? Okay. Objective. Now, I'm not particularly fond of this use of objective. What does it mean that it's objective? Where does that come from? It's a sort of it's not just a quality, it's an objective quality. So there must be at least one other category of qualities. Would that be subjective quality? Why hasn't he explained what he means by qualities and whether or not they are subjective or objective? There's nothing that is given when you're dealing with this ground level kind of metaphysics. You have to settle and explain everything, right? Objective? That's not something I would use in metaphysics. I would use that when we have dealt with and constructed a definition of what I mean by knowledge. Then what I point to as knowledge could possibly be objectified because it's an object I'm referring to in my claim of knowledge, like elephant or bicycle or tomato, right? And me just claiming I experience bicycle doesn't make it any kind of different kind of experience, right? Just because I make a proposition about it, or I'm thinking of a proposition, or I have the base experience or cognition, doesn't elevate it to some kind of either objective or subjective, whatever, right? So that there's a comparison built into it, that this kind of quality compared to that other kind of quality, that makes it all of a sudden either objective or subjective. This is not at all explained, right? It's just he takes a lot of things for granted here, that as if, and this is a problem in sort of some of these philosophical dissertations, that if something can be taken for granted, why can all of it be taken for granted then? Why do we need to explain some things and other things can be taken for granted? Can't I just take everything for granted then? And if something needs to be explained, why don't everything needs to be explained then, right? Then explain everything then, if we need to explain something. So, in and of themselves, ultimates may have no color, flavor, smell, etc. Indeed, according to mainstream physical, qualities may exist only in the phenomenal field of the experiencer. What's an experiencer again, right? So is objective, subjective, phenomenal. Is that subjective experience the phenomenal field of the experience? It's again, he's just throwing around terms, right? I don't like that. You're sort of being bombarded with various terms without clarification here, right? That's a sign of bad philosophy, in my opinion, that he's more concerned that he's bombarding you with his thoughts than making sure that you're on board with it and it's rigid and strict, right? Which in turn is a product of operation of a sufficiently complex nervous system. It is the specific arrangement of ultimates in a nervous system that allegedly somehow constitutes or generates its phenomenal properties. Yeah, he's trying to get to the hard problem of consciousness, right? That is sort of a so far unsolvable problem of physicalism, right? And in fact, it shouldn't be called the hard problem. It should be the fluffy endpoint of a bad metaphysics, right? the paradoxical endpoint of a bad metaphysics, something like that, right? Because by saying it's a hard problem, it alludes to it's something that can be solved. It doesn't entail that it can be solved. Calling a problem, I know it's a use of a term, right? But when you say it's like the is-ought problem, okay, so there's a problem. Oh, I have to solve it, right? Maybe you can't solve it. Maybe it's not a problem. Maybe it's just a dead end that you can't get any further, right? Okay, so qualities may exist only in the phenomenal field of the experiencer. So is that a framing of how materialists understand it, that yeah, I have some experiences, and maybe it's only me who are having these, there are no experiences out there, but it's not a fluffy way of, okay, maybe he's just sufficiently stating that he's uncertain how physicalists actually approach this, and fair enough, right? I mean, okay, I mean, don't claim more than you can claim, right? Okay, let's see the next one. The key problem of mainstream physicalism centers on how our subjective experiences of qualities. I don't like this our. Then you're taking for granted that you have solved the problem of other minds, right? By collectivizing it, you're sort of saying, all us over here, we're supposed to have this, right? Speak for yourself. There's no our subjective experience, right? There's your subjective experience. That's why you call it subjective, because it's yours, not exactly because it isn't an our, right? So you're conscrewing, or what's the term? Appealing to something and then the opposite of it. And our is, in the best understanding, something that could be objective. Otherwise, it couldn't be ours, right? But our is subjective. But then it's the opposite. Then it's mine, right? Then it can't be ours. Our subjective. So it's again this. It's bad. It's bad choice of words, right? It's not thought through, right, how this comes across, right? And it's also possibly a sort of camouflaged appeal to collective thinking, right? And that if he can create this idea of hour and appeal to all those who read and agree with him or wants to agree with him, he then becomes sort of the priest of those who think differently, right? By appealing to a collective called our, rather than saying my experience, right? Okay. Of qualities. What it is like to feel the warmth of fire, the redness of an apple, the bitterness of disappointment, etc. Yeah, that's also something I thought about here, right? The warmth of a fire is an attribute of some object, right? The wood that is burning in the fire, or whatever is burning, right? The redness of an apple, that's an attribute of an apple, an object, right? And then the bitterness of disappointment. Oh, is there an object called disappointment? No, that's more like a feeling. Then the bitterness is a metaphor for a feeling, right? But bitterness is something that an apple could have. But disappointment is not an object like an apple. Then bitterness is used here as a sort of a metaphorical replacement of something you could taste. But you can't taste disappointment, right? So there's sort of also this sort of fluffy use of terms, right? Okay. Can arise from mere arrangement of ultimates. These ultimates do possess abstract relational properties such as mass, spin, momentum, and charge, but there is nothing about mass, spin, momentum, and charge, or the relative positions and interactions across ultimates in terms of which one could deduce what the warmth of fire, the redness of an apple, and the bitterness of disappointment feel like. Oh yeah, that's the same, this sort of use of terms down here that I refer to up here. So I don't need to take that again. Subjectively. As long as they fit with the broadly observed correlations between neural activity and reported experience, mappings between these two domains are entirely arbitrary. I would agree, right? There's sort of... There's a wall between these two. The colors and sounds and taste are, if anything, only correlated maybe to certain objects and events over here. But they can only be correlated. There's nothing that necessitates that, and as you say here, that maybe I should let him speak. In principle, it is as invalid, in quote, valid, to state that spin up constitutes or generates the phenomenal property of coldness and spin down warmth, as it is to say the exact opposite. So you could say the opposite, that spin up is warmth and spin down is cold, and you wouldn't be able to. So there's an arbitrary connection between experiences and descriptions of that particular reality he's referring to, right? Okay. My nose is itchy, I'm sorry. Okay, so he says, there is nothing intrinsic about spin or about any other property of ultimates or arrangements thereof that would allow us to make the distinction. Okay, I'm on board with that, I would say. This central and arguably insoluble problem, well, maybe it's not a problem, has been referred to by many names such as the explanatory gap by Levine, the hard problem of consciousness, Chalmers. The qualities of experience are irreducible to the observable parameters of physical arrangements, whatever the arrangement may be, in the sense that it is impossible, even in principle, to deduce the qualities from the... Okay, so I'm like, you just jumped into the understanding of an inside-outside dichotomy without any clarification. And now you're going to explain to me that there is no way to get from the hard problem consciousness thing. But you are alluding to an inside-outside dichotomy, right? How did you get to that? Just because the physicalists are talking about it doesn't mean that you automatically can take it for granted, right? I mean, it doesn't follow out of nowhere, right? You have to argue for it. I don't see an argument. I see some argumentation here that is further down the road of necessitating a dichotomy of an inside-outside that has not been argued for, right? And that's one of the things I'm looking for. So I guess this could possibly be a case of he's not even going to argue it, right? He's just going to take it for granted without any clarification of any kind. Whatever the arrangement be, they sense that qualities of yeah. More generally, the argument here is that sorry about that. I'll have to that damn that there is no entailment from facts. No. About ultimates. There are no facts. There are no facts in metaphysics. Because you need to have established metaphysics and epistemology in order to get to facts. It's incredible, man, right? Facts about ultimates. But if they're ultimate, can you further establish whether or not an ultimate is a fact? When you call it ultimate, it seems like you can't go any further, right? If it's ultimate. And then you can clarify whether or not they're facts. It just sounds weird. Choice of words here, right? Okay, to facts about experience. There is no fact about ultimates that implies a priori a fact about experience. Now, so there can both be facts outside. Oh, but this fact thing. Oh, because fact is something, you can refute it. So if I can bring in the term fact, it's something that is sort of hardline, right? It's something you have to accept because it's a fact. So, don't like it. Okay. Let me scroll a bit here. Greg Rosenberg articulated what is perhaps the best refutation of entailment from facts about ultimates to facts about experience. His argument begins with the recognition that what facts? Patterns of bare differences. Well, can a difference be a fact? All facts about ultimates. Can there be some ultimates that are not facts then? And all facts, how do you have access to all facts? How do you know when it's all? You say, okay, I reached the end of the library. I guess this is all the facts. How do you get to these kind of enormous claims? It's ridiculous, man, right? About ultimates are merely patterns of bare differences. This echoes Bertrand Russell's point that science can only characterize things and phenomena in terms of how they differ from other things. Yeah, because science is, or quantifications, scientific quantifications are just comparisons between shit, right? You take one object and says that other object is 5.3 of these objects. Right? You have object called a meter, and you say this elephant is 7 meters. You're comparing one object with another object, right? That's what the quantification, in order to measure whatever you expect to be the case in a quantified manner about a prediction of the future, right? Science can only characterize things and phenomena in terms of how they differ from other things and phenomena. For instance, an ultimate with positive electric charge is characterized in terms of how it is relevant behavior differs from that of a negatively charged ultimate. Charge is thus a relational property defined on the basis of bare differences. Yeah, if everything is the same, you don't need to clarify anything. But if there are differences, then you describe the differences by their comparison of their differences, so to say, right? It's obvious. I mean, it's obvious to me, right? I'm worked in science for many years, so it's sort of obvious to me. Okay, Rosenberg then proceeds to show that facts about experience, phenomenal properties, cannot be entailed by patterns of bare differences, even though qualitative differences between experience can admittedly instantiate a structure of bare differences. Not bare necessities, but bare differences. Therefore, phenomenal properties phenomenal cannot be reduced to facts about ultimates. Well, stop talking about facts, please, right? Because there are no facts in metaphysics, please. allow me to unpack this. Okay, so he is going to unpack the present here. There are qualitative differences across our experiences of various colors. Qualitative differences. There are different shades of red, or what it is like to see yellow is different from what it's like to see red. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, fair enough. But they're both colors, right? They're both categorized as a kind of color. They're not a different kind of qualia. They're a different scope. They're a different quality within the scope of this qualia, but they're the same qualia. You can't say that. You can say that yellow it is different from smell of strawberry, right? But you couldn't say it's the same qualia. It's a different qualia, right? But yellow and red is the same qualia. And one way we sort of, or what I qualify it to be the same qualia is that each time and I open and close my eyes, it influences a color, and all that which is influenced by me open and closing my eyes is what I classify as color, and that would be both yellow and red. But I can open or close my eyes and still smell strawberries, no matter how I use my eyes, right? Though I know eyes are a representation inside my brain and all these things that come later down the road, right? But you know what I mean. There's a correlation, right? It's sufficient for me at least. These qualitative differences can even be graded along relevant dimensions. And go into all these, this kind of, fly fucking little differences. It's sort of this academic endeavor here. I can unpack this very precisely. He doesn't need to unpack whether or not why there's an inside-outside dichotomy. That just apparently follows without any unpacking. But this has been described by various philosophers up here, but now he's going to unpack it further here, right? It's sort of, well, why is all this unpacking for these minor details, or rather minor details, when you didn't need to unpack anything about an inside-outside dichotomy? Do you think it just follows like that? You don't need to explain it, how you get to it? Okay, so let's jump in. If one were to assign, these qualitative differences can even be graded along relevant dimensions. The qualitative differences between seeing yellow and red seems bigger than the qualitative difference between seeing yellow and orange. So what? If one were to assign, this is also habitual thinking, I think. I don't like this argumentation here. If one were to assign a number to, fuck your numbers, right? One could abstract out of pure difference structure. However, that a bare difference structure can be abstracted from our phenomenal properties does not imply that phenomenal properties are entailed by bare difference structures. Maintaining so inverts the logic of the situation. It is phenomenal properties that ground bare difference structures in the first place. I don't know why he needs all this convoluted unpacking here. I'm completely on board with what he's saying, right? I would rather have him unpack how he gets to that external world. That's the argument I'm looking for, right? I'm not buying this implicit, of course it's there. Everybody knows that, right? Because it's a remnant of this weird materialist metaphysics he is criticizing. He's criticizing the metaphysics, but he's still keeping that outside as if it doesn't need to be explained. I mean, if anybody needs to explain it, it's somebody who's criticizing materialism, man, right? Then you need to, if you're refuting that direct experience of an external world, which is sort of entailed in how you refute the problem of the hard problem, right? Then you also have to let go of, at least in the first instant, of that external world. That disappears also. It doesn't get allowed to stay there, right? And if you have to reinvent that external world, you have to state how you do it. You can't just get to keep it. when you have just refuted it, right? To bring this home, Rosenberg offers the following thought experiment. Imagine a field of tightly packed yellow and red. Oh my. If one observes this field from a sufficient distance, one sees the color orange. It could then be argued that the phenomenal property orange arises from a pattern of bare differences. However, if one were to choose... Sorry if another pair of colors with the same delta in wavelength. No. Wavelengths are all sorts of scientific qualification or quantifications. These are abstractions. You can't use them in metaphysics because you need to have settled metaphysics in order to start talking about wavelengths. Right? It's this mix of philosophy and science that is so fucking problematic. You cannot use science in philosophy. Done. Period. I'm not buying it, right? Because all of this philosophy have to be settled before you can do science. You can't say, I'm going to establish all that philosophy I need in order to understand what is meant by what I call science. And then say, no. My philosophy, I'm going to bring in science in order to qualify the philosophy I need in order to get to science. Fuck off, man, right? This and other arguments along similarly render mainstream physicalism arguably untenable. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be this convoluted in order to refute it. It's quite simple in my opinion, right? It's something like, okay, if I say my hand is outside, if I start off by saying, I have experience. Where is that experience? Well, it's inside my head, inside my brain, which is inside my head, right? So my experience is inside my head. And in order for me to have access to whatever I am talking about, it has to be an experience, right? So these are sort of foundational axioms that you could possibly be working from. And I would say that any physicalist, materialist, would say, I am on board with these axioms, that there's my head, inside is my brain, and inside my brain is my experiences, right? I don't have experiences out here because they are not a part of me, right? So in order for me to have experiences or anything, colors, sounds, and taste, they have to be in my mind, right? So if I say then this hand is outside my head, it cannot fucking be outside my head, right? What I'm talking about cannot be outside my head, right? Because it has to be an experience. It must be in here then. Then what is then this then, right? Well, it isn't that which I claim. I'm just claiming it is outside. I added the understanding of outside without any foundation. I am inside that experience I classify as an inside-outside, right? You are taking the experience that is purely inside, and then you're dividing that experience up to an inside-outside, right? Otherwise, you cannot experience this because it's outside. So either this is not outside, or you're not experiencing it, right? You can't say this is outside my mind, right? There it is. Okay. Consciousness as an irreducible property of matter. That is chapter 3. Maybe I should keep that to the next one. So it's like, what have we actually done here? Maybe I should get back to the beginning here. It's always, as I say, in the beginning that the problems are, right? Sorry for all the scrolling here. The ontology of physicalism. Now, he's calling it an ontology. So, what's the difference between metaphysics and ontology? That still eludes me. Some people talk about metaphysics, and when I call what I'm talking about metaphysics, some tells me that no, you're doing ontology. But now he's calling this ontology rather than metaphysics. And if an ontology is that a reality is of irreducible entities outside his consciousness, then ontology cannot be a description of consciousness. Then physicalism, ontology must be metaphysics, right? If ontology is a description of your experiences or classification of your experiences. So I would like to say, in my opinion, there is only ontology. There is no metaphysics in the sense of idealism. Because you're talking about something you don't have access to. I say you should shut the fuck up about it, right? Don't try to confuse me by trying to circumvent your experiences in order to explain what is going on before they become experiences, and then trying to screw around with my understanding of those experiences that you actually are just arguing in a circular manner. You're saying, okay, I have some experiences. I get something outside my experiences. Now I'm going to take some abstractions and explain the experiences before they become experiences. But you just use those experiences to create the abstractions, to go back behind the experience to explain the experience. How the hell does that work? Aren't you just, circling around your own, in some circle jerk of your mind, right? Of your abstractions and throwing around terms in order to, at the end of the day, a fucking tomato is a tomato, right? It doesn't matter what kind of metaphysics I can possibly come up with that goes on before it becomes the experience of tomato. It's still a fucking tomato, right? And that's also the starting point he's alluding to, which is those phenomenal experiences, phenomenal consciousness, or subjective whatever, qualia, right? That's his start. That's his actual starting point. Then why is he so concerned about creating these ideas about something going on beyond these experiences? Because he doesn't have access to them, right? He has access to his experiences. He has access potentially to tomatoes. So in my opinion, if your metaphysics doesn't change the tomato, it doesn't matter. And you can extrapolate that to all experience, my bicycle and my car and my girlfriend and my house and whatever I'm interacting with in my everyday reality, so to say. If that metaphysic you are spending all your fucking waking hours possibly to try to clarify doesn't change a fucking thing, why the hell would I care, right? Because I'm the one who has to decide what the hell I do with the tomato. And whether or not if I see a tomato, I can just start eating it, right? That's more important to me, whether or not you can come up with some elaborate story of what goes on before I experience the tomato. That doesn't change the tomato anyway, right? What's the purpose of all this? Right? There is only ontology, classifying and clarifying your experience in a way that sort of makes sense to you, right? That's ontology. That's what you do. You do ontology. You don't do metaphysics, right? So maybe get rid of metaphysics. All these elaborate, abstract thinkings about what the hell might be going on beyond your experiences that you don't have access to anyway. That doesn't change the tomatoes anyway, right? That doesn't help you decide whether or not you could eat the tomato anyway, right? For all the energy and resources spent on doing this kind of thinking without it leading to anything I can possibly use for anything in my everyday is so stupid, in my opinion. Right? And then there's a reality. Yeah. I implicitly agree with materialists. There is a reality out there. It's like, how do you think you can argue in this way without arguing? You don't even attempt anything that is even remotely alluding to any kind of argument. It's like, this is given to me. But I need to unpack in 7 complicated ways that there is a reason to take the hard problem seriously in a different way than the scientists do, right? But reality is there. You don't have to. Of course, there is an outside world. You don't even have. I just take it for granted. I don't need to clarify anything. No axioms, no arguments, nothing. Right? I don't buy it. Please share, like, and subscribe. Give me a comment. Consider donation. Otherwise, see you in the next one.